Hi, and welcome to the Living in Harmony Family Ministry Podcast, where parents are at the forefront of raising their kids. We exist to help families create a biblical culture in the home while navigating the culture in the world. That being said, welcome to the show. Hello and welcome to Harmony. I hope you're having a good week, whether you're listening in your car, at home, or doing whatever you're doing. We are officially in take 2 of the podcast because in the first 3 minutes of take 1, after I had already told everyone to silence their phone, I did not silence my computer, and we got a phone call. But anyways, it is good to be back. I think we have a good show lined up today. We're going to talk about something that literally every parent probably struggles with, I would think. This might be one. I struggle with it. Maybe you don't. I do. But anyways, before we get into that, what did we do this week?
Well, this week in real time, I don't know if people are listening to this delayed, but in real time, it was Chinese spy balloon week. And so the Chinese spy balloon was floating overhead, and we were able to see it from our house.
Front porch.
Yeah, from the front porch. And I have a pair of binoculars, but I also have a very nice scope on my rifle that my dad gave me years ago. And so I got my rifle scope out. So it looked like I was trying to shoot it down. I really wasn't. I was just looking through the scope at it. Interestingly enough, I couldn't figure out how to take pictures through the scope. I got very nice pictures of the inside of the scope because that's what it focused on. But there we go.
I'm very surprised that we didn't hear more reports of people in South Carolina shooting stuff at the spy balloon. I'm a little disappointed as well. You know, America.
Well, it was really high.
Yeah. Well, before we go any further, I guess we should let people know who we are if there's their first episode ever. I am Delmar.
I'm Robert.
And I'm April.
And yes, we talk about parenting. We talk about what it means to raise kids. And honestly, sometimes we're raising each other on this podcast. So it's
my youngest son and my daughter-in-law were out with me, helping me to look for the Chinese spy balloon. So it was a family event.
There you go. It's the family thing. This week as a family, my son, he has listened to this podcast. He knows what we do out here in the studio. And he said he wanted to start his own podcast. He is 5. So we recorded it, and I got more feedback from his little podcast than I have anything in my adult life. Okay, I don't even know where to place that as far as like accomplishments.
So Calvin out podcasted us, is what you're saying?
I think he out podcasted this one. I think he out podcasting the Practically Pastoring one. I think, and then this week he said he wanted to do a second one. So I just put it out, and it's embarrassing. Like, I didn't want to put it out because I'm asking him catechism questions, and then I misspeak, and he corrects me. And then my wife's like, no, you have to leave that in there because he corrected you. I was like, oh. So anyways, we'll see how that goes. He has started his little podcast called Calvin Cast, and I found out live recording last week that he has the 5-year-old equivalent of a girlfriend. So... We'll see what that is. I'm going to be bringing a lot more questions to this thing. But today, as we move into like our parental content, I want to just go ahead and throw this out there. How rested do you feel every morning when you wake up?
Ooh.
Depends on the morning.
Yeah. Because that's what we're going to be talking about today. What does that feel? Someone once told me getting old is like this. You wake up one day and you're a little tired and you stay that way forever. And I was like, yeah, that's a little bit like it.
At least for a while.
Yeah. And then, but so today we're going to be talking about self-care in parenting. We're going to be talking about how do you take care of your own self? How do you make sure that you get to where you're not running on fumes? And it is a balance because I do agree with Matt Chandler. He did a sermon and he says that a father, if you come in from work and by the time you go to bed, you are exhausted, you know that you have done your job well. And what he's saying is it should be an act of effort. But at the same time, that can also create a hustle culture in your parenting life. And I know sometimes my kids don't get the best version of me when I'm tired, when I'm exhausted. So we want to really just talk about, have y'all ever been in a situation or a season of just exhaustion? And how did you, before we get into any solutions, like how did you find yourself in that season? Did it sneak up on you? Or how did we get there?
I think that there's different things that can cause you to get into a season of exhaustion. One thing that I think is easy to do, especially sometimes I think when your kids are younger, and then also as they get older, I think there's kind of a middle ground in there where maybe things sort of settle down a little, but I think it can be easy to overbook your schedule and get so committed to a lot of things and busyness and activities, even when they're all good things at times, that you can get distracted, you can get exhausted, you can get spread too thin, stuff like that. I know that's happened to us at times. I remember when we were, this was probably close to 20 years ago, and our kids were all in elementary school age years or preschool years. But I remember having a calendar that we kept on the wall. And one day I just looked at it and I was exhausted and I was just always tired. And I felt like we were always trying to catch up with, things that we were wanting to do or meaning to do, just, interactions and things like that. And I looked at our calendar and I noticed that every day had at least one obligation on it, sometimes two. And I thought, this is craziness. We need to pull back. And we kind of had Robert and I talked together. So it's a family meeting of, I guess, the parent meeting of saying, what on this schedule can we step back from and eliminate, or at least take a time off from? So we had to just pare back and start with just a few things and work with that and learn to not overdo ourselves, because even good things and godly things doesn't mean it's right for you in that season at all times.
Yeah. I think about how easily you just take your child alone, what they can do to a schedule. Hey, we're going to play a sport. Okay, well, this sport meets every single day of the week. And now on Saturday morning, you have to go watch your kid play said sport in the morning. And then, we want to have this extracurricular thing. Like, we're going to take them to church because that's priority. So, like, we're doing church, in our family 2-3 times a week as corporately as a family. And then we're doing sports. And then if they want to have a friend thing. And next thing you know, you're like, we're having to fight just to have family time.
Exactly.
And then you throw in you as a grown adult in there, having a job, many of us a job and a half, right? Because, and I'll tell you this, you throw in parenting, that is its own job. And you can just feel exhausting. And Robert and I were just talking before the podcast about some things I have in my schedule, job-wise, not related to church, but other stuff. It's like, maybe I need to start putting the brakes on some stuff, or it can catch up on you. And so today, in April, you hinted at this, but we're just going to throw out just 5 very useful things, I think, that if we at least consider these in our scheduling, if we consider these in our lives, it will help us learn how to take care of ourselves. And I think some of these have been tested and true, but you hinted at the first one, so we're just going to go ahead and drop it out there. And the first one is this: if you want to be able to not be a burnout parent, if you want to be able to be a parent who can give your kids more quality attention, the first thing we really should do is to prioritize and plan in our own schedules. So, and what that means is not just schedule. That's basic. And here's the thing: a lot of us parents, we don't even schedule, but we need to schedule so then we can prioritize it, because some things just shouldn't take priority.
Right. And this is I was actually just talking to someone day before yesterday, and we were trying to get together for a thing, a couple of families, and I said, yeah, have your wife call my wife and we'll get this done, because it's just kind of a stereotype that the wives do the scheduling. And I think it's fine to delegate and to have roles in your family, but at the same time, this is something that as men and fathers, we do need to be involved in setting those priorities. And I know a lot of you guys probably checked out when you heard that we're going to talk about self-care, but it's not just it is a thing that we need to do. We need to be able to set those priorities, to be able to do that. I mean, we do that in our jobs, right? We have things that we have to get done, and a lot of us have, you have 14 things that you have to get done this week, and so you make a list and you prioritize, or you have a system to do that. Some of us have computer systems that do that. Some people have, assistants and other people, humans who help us do that. And there's no reason why we shouldn't do that same sort of process inside our family to a point. That's not, you don't run your don't run your family like you run a business. But to be able to think through what's important, to step back and once in a while to take a retreat with yourself or with your wife and say, hey, these are things that are important for us as a family to do, and here are the activities that we want to do. How do those fit into those priorities?
Yeah, and when it comes to those priorities, make the call what is the highest priority before you're in the middle of it.
Yes.
If you are like us and God is a big deal in your life and church is, then guess what? My child is not doing a sport that's going to keep him away from it. And you know what? If he does get really good at a sport and a coach wants him to play, well, you know what, coach? You can work around that schedule. And I actually know coaches who've done that. They've been like, the child's really good. And it's like, well, this child's going to be in church. And because that says something. And it actually sends a message to your children. When your children watch you prioritize your schedule, that trickles down into their lives. It keeps them from getting burnout as they get older because they've watched you say no to certain things or say we have to quit certain things. And sometimes the things we have to quit are actually things that we like.
And they're good things.
Yeah, they're not necessarily bad things.
Yeah, and I remember when our kids were much younger and they were in soccer. And Robert played soccer all through his growing up years, and they were interested in soccer. They thought they were little, but I remember the turning point for us and reprioritizing. Robert was on a deployment overseas at that time, and so it was just me with the kids, and that's when we had the breaking point with soccer, because it was 3 different kids in 3 different age brackets, 3 different teams that each had 2 practices a week and a game on Saturdays. And all 3 of them, they often, the games were often at different fields in town and the practices were at different locations. And it was me trying to manage, what is that? 1, 2, 3, 9 different soccer events across the week. And I reached a breaking point and I sat down and said, the kids have been asking about karate for a couple of years. I think it's time to investigate that, because they had a class for them in the afternoon that was perfect for that fit with our time period, and they could all do it at the same time. It was 2 days a week, but we were done and home before Robert would be home from work, and we still had all of our evening family time, and it was a needed reprioritization.
Yes, and so as you prioritize, I would encourage you really think through what the vision is of your family. Every family is different. Our family, I know very clearly things are important. I've shared with you, God is important. Also, just family in general is important. It's one of the reasons we live where we live. It's one of the reasons that we do that. And let your plan come out of the vision for your family. If a lot of sports are going to keep us from doing things, then you know what? We're going to find a sport we can do something together with, like archery or something like that, so we can be together as a family. So that would just be what I would encourage you, is prioritize it. Second thing, this one comes easier for some than others. If it's overused, then sometimes that can not be good. But here it is, ready? When it comes to helping us balance self-care with parenting responsibilities, ask for help. Sometimes, parent, you need a day off. And it's okay to ask your neighbor or your mom or your friend, can you watch the kids for a while?
Mm-hmm. And this is where the body of Christ, the church, really comes into play, or should. That should be a place where you find, people that you trust, that people that share your worldview, people that will help you, that will help you raise your kids, that your kids already know. This would be a place, and people who are willing to help you with that. So that's a thing that we should be doing for each other, and we should be willing to, at different stages in your life, you are asking for help, and at different stages you're offering for help, offering to help somebody else, and that's just something that we need to be willing to do.
Yeah. So asking for help, sometimes this is sucking up your pride thing. Even in your own marriage, sometimes just ask your spouse. If you are burnt out, if you've had an exhausting day, if you're tired, sometimes we snap. The other day, my boys didn't want to go to bed, and I was really frustrating with this, because it's like, I'm at the point where I'm like, are we at the spanking stage? Because sometimes that happens in bed, right? And I just remember looking at my wife and I said, I can't figure this one out and I'm tired. Can you help? And she was like, hey, kids. And she whipped some phrase out of her mind that I don't know where she tucked it from. And it just, oh, yeah, we'll do it. And I'm like, first of all, I got jealous. I was like, no. Second, thank you. Help me, because I don't want to handle this wrong, because that just makes the whole family worse.
And it's amazing how many times just the other parent coming in and getting involved in something,
Yes.
for some reason, sometimes that just makes a difference and you don't necessarily do anything differently.
Yeah.
And it just works.
Boom. And it does. It helps us with because if I come home and I know that I'm in a certain place, then if you allow yourself to go to that bad place, your self-care is worse, because now you have guilt on top of the exhaustion you have.
Right.
So,
And, I would just like to say, like, Robert was always very good about that, because, in our family, for those that may not know, like, we homeschooled our kids. And so I was home with the kids all day, and then we would have activities or different things like that. And so I was the mom and the teacher, and there was, we enjoyed it and had a good time with it. But by the time Robert would come home from work, there were times where I needed to be like done for a while with being what I called, we kind of joked about, we call it the parent in charge. So sometimes we would joke of like if one of the kids would come up and after and say like, Mom, I need this or whatever, I would look at them and say, I'm sorry, but I'm not currently the parent in charge. And Robert is like, what?
that's actually a pretty good hack. I'm about to try that one.
Well, and again,
I was just gonna say, it wasn't done in an unloving way. No. And they knew we were joking. And sometimes it would even be like, they come up to say something. I still remember, I think it was Nathaniel who came up one time. He was young, came up and was starting to say, hey, Mom, oh, wait, you're not the parent in charge anymore. And went over, it's like, Dad.
We taught him well.
Yeah. And this is another one of those things, to the guys, there's a stereotype in our culture that says that it's the women who should take care of the kids, and the man comes home from work and sits down and, watches TV or does whatever. And that's not what God calls us to be. And so, you are called as a father to be a father. That does mean provider. It does mean protector, but it does mean more than that. And sometimes provide doesn't just mean money. It means time. It means providing that love and support, providing that extra help to your wife, providing that extra help to your kids, just getting
providing
on the floor.
Presence.
Yeah, just getting on the floor and wrestling with them. Go outside and let them run circles. And, it doesn't necessarily have to be super, super strenuous, although it can be. And sometimes that's fun, but it does need to be something.
We're really blessed at our house that when we bought it, had this unfinished property in the backyard, and we've kind of finished it. And it's really helpful, because sometimes my wife would be like, can you just take the kids to the man cave and play Ninja Turtle games with them? Yeah. And then sometimes I'll tell her, I have to edit something. Can you just watch the kids here? It doesn't have to be in a house, but even if you have different rooms, we can say, hey, we'll take the kids over here for a minute. And if you're just providing that 1 or 2 hours, that is golden when you got 2-3 kids running around. So kind of transition to the third one. I was thinking this one through, and I was thinking there's 2 types of car drivers I've seen, car owners. There's the ones who get the car, and 20 years later, they still have that car because they drove the speed limit, didn't wreck it, changed the oil when they were supposed to, checked the transmission fluid. And then you have the one, in 20 years, they've had 10 cars because they just ride it into the dirt. And they're like, I could just get another one. And how many times in our own lives do we can tend to be in one of those same veins with our own self? Like, some people are really good at managing that, and then some people, they just burn themselves into the ground. And the problem is you can't get a new you every 4 years. So the third one is I think really important. It's kind of like changing that oil. It's like checking that transmission fluid. And that is this: we need, in our daily routines, we actually need to have self-care. Right. So that way we don't just run out.
Starts with a cappuccino in the morning made by my awesome husband.
Oh, learn something new every day.
Yeah. So, but it
well, that's self-care for him too.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, the day for us starts with a cup of coffee. But one of the things that's key in this is finding some time in there, in your day. We just talked about some ways to do that. Sometimes it's passing parenting duties back and forth. But even if you're not a parent, sometimes there's household responsibilities. There's things that you do that you need to pass back and forth. And then, the other thing that is foundational to all of this as Christ followers is to spend time with Christ, to spend time thinking about, meditating on the Word of God, thinking about it, thinking about how it is that I can structure my life, not just in the terms of a schedule, but spiritually structure my soul to be in line with God's heart. Because when I do that, and I've found in my own life, when I am in line with what God is calling me to be, my life just works better. So it's easier for me to take care of myself when I'm allowing God to take care of me in that way.
Yeah, and pushing that little bit of daily self-care is so important in there. It's your time with God. Some of you have a hobby. If not, get a thing. When I do this thing, it fills me up. For me, one of mine a lot of times is walking. If I just go out on a walk, I clear my head. Oftentimes I call a friend or someone who doesn't even live around here. I've got a couple good friends, Jock and Sean and Corey. I call them all the time. They know when I go on walks because I call them. But I need that. That's how I feel. And so what does it for you? So a fourth principle that we can really be really important for us when it comes to self-care is practice setting boundaries with our kids, with our spouse, about the time that you need so you can recover your time. So this is a little different than setting a family schedule. This is having your own personal schedule within your family schedule.
Oh, well, when I was seeing, setting boundaries and being able to take care of, self-care and have time for that, one of the first thing, I don't know why, but the first thing that came to mind for me was, I don't know, I have these stories right now I'm telling from when our kids were little that I hope they all land well, because I don't know, but Robert and I were always, and still are, big on taking the time to have date nights. The kids were regularly seeing us say, well, we're going on a date tonight. Once they were old enough, where they didn't need a babysitter because the oldest was old enough to, watch the younger siblings, when we would leave, it really became kind of a fun joke, not a joke, but it was a fun tradition. We would say, and I guess you have to understand that they were old enough that this was not, rude to say to them, but we would always say, okay, call us as we're walking out the door, call us if you need us. And then we would say, but try not to need us. And then we said it every time. And then it got to where we would just say, okay, call us if you need us. And the kids would go, but try not to need you. And it was our way of just saying, we're off for our date. This is our time. Work your problems out on your own. Don't be calling us over silly things. And they could, handle their things.
Yeah. Having that time together as a couple, would you be married, is so important, because it works like this. At first, you have children, you need to go on a date, but you don't because you're taking care of your children. Then, as you get older, your children can take care of themselves, but now you don't want to go on a date with each other because you've quit pursuing each other. So it's important to manage that now and get up on that on the front end when it comes to practicing boundaries. And there's one more, and this one is particularly convicting because it's something I tend to either be dominating with this one or not. And that is so important. Oh my gosh. And that is this: taking care of your physical health. When it comes to you having self-care, you will have more energy. You will have more clarity. You will have more, almost everything, when this becomes a place that takes more precedent in our life. And it's hard because sometimes you have a stressful day with your kids and you're a stress eater. Or sometimes you have an exhausting day with your kids, so you don't want to go for that walk. So sometimes this doesn't just include food. This includes sleep. Hey, all day at home, I was at work. I have more work I have to do, but I need to play with my kids first. So I play with my kids, and then at 9, I finally start working, and I'm done at 1. Like, it's not just physical, it's everything. So when it comes to physical health, taking care of that, like how would we manage these things?
Yeah, that's the one that for me is just like convicting because I definitely, think like I've got to make more time to take care of like exercise and better sleep and things like that. There's some of these that are just glaring at me in the moment as we're talking about them.
And it makes sense. I mean, our bodies are amazingly designed, but just like a high performance car, if you do stuff that, if you put bad fuel in a car, then it won't, it doesn't work very well. If you do things, if you were talking about changing the oil, if you don't do maintenance on your car, it doesn't work very well. And so if you don't do maintenance on your body, it doesn't work as well. And we just have to remember that.
I remember about 10 years ago, maybe 12 years ago, I weighed about 300 pounds. And then I lost down to I weighed about like 180. I've been in the gym for a while. And my friend, my accountability guy, he was always in shape. By the way, if you're going to lose weight, don't find someone also big to lose weight with. Find someone who's already in shape because they already have those habits developed. It was a physical hack. Anyways, so we did all that. And he takes me to Walmart one day. I'm like, why are we going to Walmart? He's like, I'm going to show you something. And we go in there, go shopping. And we walk around. He grabs, the 45-pound weights that go in the bars. He gives me one of those for each man. He goes, just hold that while we walk around. I was like, okay, why? And then we just shop for like 40 minutes. And I'm looking at him, I was like, dude, are we buying these or not? He's like, no, we're not buying these. I'm like, what are we doing? He goes, that's to remind you where you were, bro.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
He's like, you used to carry that around with you everywhere. Because that's about how much I had lost. And, I'm coming out of a season where I was in a little bit more stress, so I put some more weight back on. I know what it's like to be on the other side. So I would just encourage you as a parent, like we can't take this this challenge of taking care of our health too serious because we get a lot back in regards to our care. So anyways, when it comes to all these things, our biggest encouragement to you today is just really think through these. And if you need to, just pick one. Say, okay, what am I going to do today? I need to prioritize something because my schedule is slammed right now. Or I need to ask somebody for help because I can't even get my mind around it. Or I just need to incorporate one routine a day. Or maybe I need to practice the boundaries because my kids, they've been running around and I finally need to draw the line so they need to pay attention. Or I just need to start and take care of my physical health. There's a book I'd recommend for that. It's called Lean Body Lifestyle. And it's really good because it's not do this to lose weight. It's here's 10 habits. If you just do these habits, you'll be in shape. And it's actually I've used it in my life. So I'd encourage you to get that one. But that being said, we're going to transition to something real fun this week, and that is what we talked about in church. So y'all ready?
Yes.
Ready.
Here we go. Submit. Ooh, that feels good, doesn't it?
I was wanting to send you a text during church as soon as we got into this is what it's about. Like, this is going to be fun for the podcast.
Oh my gosh. Like literally. Okay. So we're going through this series on grab bag theology, things that we need in our lives every day. And that is appropriate submission is what Dan was talking about. It was so good. And I was just thinking, if you were to go on Twitter and like tweet half these people in there something about submission, the entire Twitterverse would just jump on.
Yes.
Because it's been so negatively stereotyped. And I would ask you, in regards to our lives, why do you think that is?
Well, I think it was one of the things that I think he said it. It's one of the ways that when I submit, I'm required to put myself under someone else's authority, to let someone else be in charge, to let someone else make decisions, to let someone else do something in that particular area. And my selfishness really doesn't want to do that.
Yeah. And I think submission a lot of times looks like, hey, you do this. But, Dan really pulled it in and says, no, God wrote the book on submission, literally. And submission is to willingly place yourself under the authority of another. That's what true biblical submission is. Because if you think about it, to the unwilling placing under somebody, that's domination. If that's not right. Submission is a graceful, good thing. And he went into how, as Christians, like ultimately, we'll just take it right on to the point. This is Christ, right? Mm-hmm. This is him on the earth. Like Christ's entire work on the earth was an act of submission. That was it. And in that submission, he had domination over our sin, but like he was here serving us. I mean, that sounds just weird even thinking about that. God served us. As I'm writing this down in my notes, I'm like, am I hearing it? But it's true. He served us even though he didn't have to. And I would just pose it out today as we tease this into our family lives. How important is this nature of submission when it comes to our parenting, and how does it play out in our parenting?
Well, I think it's key to everything. I mean, the things that we were talking about a minute ago when we were talking about, being willing to ask for help and being willing to offer help. When I come in from a hard day of work, or sometimes not a hard day of work, but I sort of felt like it, and April looks over at me and says, I really need you to take the kids, I have to submit my desires to go just crash and rest for a little bit to her need to have rest. And I have to put myself, I have to submit my will underneath that and say, no, I'm going to help you because I know that she needs that. Yeah.
And also at the same time, you're submitting. I mean, you're really not submitting to my authority. You're submitting to God's authority and your role to love me as Christ loved the church, which, he sacrificed, he laid down his life, and, so.
Yeah. If we're going to be honest, women, you don't want, you want your man submitting to God. Because if he submits to God, that means whatever is true, whatever is lovely, whatever is just, he's dwelling on those things. And then that pours back out on you in blessing. But when he submits to anything else, he's submitting to creation. And creation is flawed. And I think it's such a good thing when you encourage your husband to submit to God. And this is just something I'll just tell you as a man. If you're listening and you're a woman and you see your husband do something that's good or holy or just, call that out in him. Let him know you see that. Let him know you see him. Because the truth is, like, we want to help around the house and we do want to do it humbly. But listen, you want to know. Just be honest. You want to know that your wife notices that. And I'm sure it's the same way maybe when the shoe's on the other foot, correct, April?
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that I don't know who all was thinking this during the sermon, but one of the things that was going through my mind as well, and this really wasn't part of what Dan touched on in the sermon, but as a woman, I thought about it, was also, just within marriage, the submission, because a lot of times that has a bad connotation as well, for the wife to submit to, her husband's authority. And that can sometimes be, I just think submission in general has been twisted and distorted within our culture and even within the church at large as far as what that means. But I really loved the fact that, Dan was saying, this might be jumping ahead, I don't know. So sorry, not sorry, but, he had mentioned that submission puts us under the authority of God's protection and blessing. Mm-hmm. And that's, why would I want to step out of God's protection and blessing? And that's how I've always looked at it is, submission doesn't mean that the person in authority makes all the decisions, makes all the shots, and just says, this is how it's going to be, like a dictator. That's not it at all. But it does mean that someone's got to be accountable. And when I'm submissive to my husband, he's the one that's held accountable. And when he's submitting to the authority of God, everything works like it should be. Yeah.
And that, like you said, that places me and ultimately my family under God's protection and allows us to be healthier. I mean, that's one of the things when we submit to the law of God, when we submit to God's commands, it's amazing how many of those things protect us from, heartbreak, protect us from harm in various ways. When we're doing the things that God calls us to do, that machine that God has created works better.
Yeah. So real talk. I loved his 2 points, and I really just drive on these points at the end because he says when we are submitting to the Lord, we benefit in 2 massive ways. And the first one is just this sense of personal injustice. And this qualifier here is you silent ignorant people by doing good. And it's also kind of that proverb, do good. It's like heaping coals on someone else's head. But when we're submitting to God, it doesn't leave a whole lot of room for disparaging things to be said about you. Because when they are said, people say, I know him. And that's a lie. And that is powerful. Your character going before you is more powerful than what anyone will say about you. And there's going to be times in your life when, because you live toward the Lord, people are going to say things about you. And the only thing you're going to have at the end of that is, are you submissive to the Lord? And will that bolster your character through this season? I was taken into a room before and specifically told not to speak to a former employee. And the former employee was a godly person. And I said, no, because he's a godly man. And he's a mentor of mine now. Because I watched, he had a submissive spirit to the Lord. I watched him weep over certain things that other men wouldn't even care about because he was so passionate about the Lord. So I think that, and I would ask, have you ever, as a parent, let's be honest, this is really good with your two kids. One kid says, this kid hit me. And then you walk in the room, you didn't see what happened. What do you have to go on right there?
Yeah, the history and the character. I mean, it's which kid is more likely to be telling the truth. And we all know, if you've got more than one kid, you all know that in that circumstance, one of them is probably believable and one of them probably isn't. And you can tell by the look on their faces 90% of the time what's just happened. And
it's literally, you are basically saying which one has shown they've submitted to authority in the past. They're going to be the more inclined to be believed at that moment. God bless you when you accidentally spank the wrong one, though. And any parent says they hadn't, you just keep doing it. All right. Well, and then there's one more that is just really big, and this is huge. And if we are seen as people who submit to God, it helps in our evangelical effectiveness, right? Now, ultimately, we know, big deal, God's sovereign. He's in control. We're not salesmen for Jesus. But what it does is it does lay a foundation for us to speak more authoritatively.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things on that, and Dan said it puts our supernatural strength, puts Christ on display. So when we submit to God in ways that are countercultural, and really, this whole conversation about submission is incredibly countercultural, right? And when we put that on display, and when we say, no, I'm going to behave in a certain way, I'm going to submit to the boss that I don't like because, I'm not going to talk bad about the boss, with the other employees when the boss isn't around, or, when I'm going to do something that shows that I'm submitting to that authority, it really, it stands out. It's something that people look at and they ask you about, why. That's just really strange. Why did you do that? Why did you behave that way? And how can you withstand that injustice that's been happening to you? How can you stand up under that time after time after time? Well, God is strengthening me in this, and that allows me to do that. And so that allows, like you were just talking about a minute ago, Delmar, it allows it allows that our behavior, our good and positive and submissive behavior, to highlight the injustice of the unjust authority. And also it allows people to see the strength of Christ in us and the work of the Holy Spirit in our lives.
Yeah. So we need to be very clear on this one. Being submissive is not being passive at all. Being submissive is probably one of the most active things you can do, because one of our core sins is autonomy apart from God. That's why we ate the fruit. We think we could do it our own way, right? So when we say, or when Scripture says being submissive, it's not saying just cower and let the world roll on you and then people will look at you and be like, oh, he's so flexible. No, it comes down to, who is Christ? Christ was not a peacekeeper. He's a peacemaker. And one of those requires a lot more effort, and he was killed because he was a peacemaker.
Well, and it also doesn't mean, and Dan said this too, it doesn't mean sitting there and being abused.
Correct.
Right? It doesn't mean staying in a position where someone is hurting you, right? And there's that requires wisdom, and that requires us, again, talking like we were talking about in the first half, being in the Word and letting the Holy Spirit talk to us to let us know where that line is. Because there's a line that says, I will submit to a lot of things, but if you try to hurt my wife or my children, I will not submit to that. I will hurt you. And what is it? Someone said the other day, I will gladly spend time in a prison ministry, developing a prison ministry to protect my family.
Ultimately, your conviction there is even coming from your submission to God. God has ordained you as the leader of your family to be the provider, protector of that family. So, of course, if anything is going to come against it, well, then you're you were ultimately submissive to God.
Right.
And it's kind of like at work. If you are at a job, you are placed under the authority of that guy or girl, like you're supposed to be submissive there. But if that authority is not in alignment with what is true and holy, you have a right to either speak out or leave or both. Because,
it's like Peter and John when they were dragged before the authorities and said, you need to stop preaching this name of Jesus. And they're like, well, you guys need to tell us whether it's right to obey God or to obey men. And with the implication, obviously, it's better to obey God.
Right.
And so there's again, that requires wisdom, and that's not always an easy thing. And that requires us to sometimes have help from other people and to think through it and to be wise with each other.
And y'all have been parents long enough, you probably could help me understand this feeling. But when you try your lives to live submissive to God, and the first time you watch your child say to someone at school or out in the world, no, I'm not doing that, based upon the principles that you've shown them and they're submitting to God, what does that do inside of a parent?
I mean, that's an awesome feeling to be able to say, to be able to look at your kid and say, I'm proud of you for what you just did, especially when they have paid a cost for that. And they have, and they know they have, but they still stood on that conviction, and they were able to hold fast to their, to the truth, because they were ultimately submitting to God's authority in their lives.
Yeah. And that's something that, I just give God the glory. We've been able to see and watch, each of our kids, we've watched them do that in different ways and different circumstances. And, it's definitely, it's a lot of different emotions and feelings, because there's this, joy. You're proud of them. There's joy, and there's a humblingness of knowing that it's not because of us. It's because of God, and we have been allowed to be used, even though we're imperfect. He's taken us as imperfect parents and been able to do a work in our children. And it's like you realize that you don't really deserve that, but you're getting to watch it. And
I can't think of, there's levels of joy that kids are able to give their parents. And I think one of those top tier levels of joy is when you watch your kid live out of a conviction, a good, solid, biblically worldview, presuppositional, conviction that God is the ultimate authority, and I will submit to Him above all things. And that's our hope. That's as we parent, that's how we go. So ultimately, that's our encouragement this week to you, is that you will enjoy submitting, that your kids will see you submitting, they'll enjoy it too, and hopefully we help enhance that by ourselves doing everything we can just not to be burned out, right? Some of you right now, here's what you need to hear. You listen to the whole podcast to hear this, and you can forget everything else. You ready? Go on a vacation.
I was just thinking, go get a massage.
Find somebody, watch your kids, get out of town, turn your phone off, pamper yourself, treat yourself, get a manicure, get a pedicure if your feet are bad, do the whole thing. Get a back massage.
Dude, I've got a massage booked already for next week.
See,
that is part of my self-care.
Do it. Get away. Some of you just got back from vacation. You're like, I just got away. Go ahead and plan a thing right now. right now.
Plan a thing.
Yeah, plan a thing. So I want to encourage you, lean into some self-care, and we will see you next time. This has been Living in Harmony. I'm Delmar.
I'm Robert.
And I'm April.
We hope that you are living in harmony. Have a great week.